Hey all, this is Ryan M. Shade, LCSW, your therapist. I'm the guy your therapist comes to see for therapy. Wanted to do this video to help people understand what on earth is going on with your mental health right now in the context of the pandemic, and how you can understand what's going on so that then you can do something about it. And so the way I'd like to do that is by explaining cognitive behavioral theory, which is the foundational understanding that I come from as a practitioner, a lot of therapists come from as a practitioner, why you do what you do, why you feel what you feel. So the first piece to understand is you have an event happen, and then you think that you have an emotion as a result of that, right? So event, emotion, right? Somebody cuts you off in traffic and you get upset. And if I say to you, why are you so angry? You'll say, because that guy cut me off, that person cut me off in traffic. But there's a really serious issue with this, if this is really what's happening. We know that we basically have no control over the events that happen in our lives, right? So what other people do, obviously this pandemic is showing us all sorts of things. And so if we think that our emotions are a direct result of things we have no control over, that means that our emotions are outside our control. And if that's the case, then that means ultimately as a therapist I wouldn't have a job and none of this would matter at all. But there's a couple of pieces to understand relative to this. The first piece is that if things that are outside of our control our emotions, then there's some very bad possibilities there, right? Because we are just a slave to whatever happens emotionally or event-wise to us in terms of emotions. So the first piece to understand is events don't lead directly to emotions, although the vast majority of people, everyone who comes into my office pretty much thinks that that's the case. Events lead to emotions. If this were true, this would mean that people who have quote-unquote good lives or happy lives or joyful lives just happen to have more good events happen than bad, which we know can't be the case, right? Because we look and we're inspired by people who go through events that we consider very bad events, and somehow they transcend those events. They don't have the emotions that we would think that we would have given that, right? So events leading to emotions, that can't be all that's happening. There has to be something else in there. And I'm going to simplify this significantly, but one of my sort of nerdy therapy icons is a guy named Albert Ellis, who started writing in the 1950s, writing books in the 50s and 60s. I think he wrote more than 50 books. And he created what he called rational motive theory, which then sort of with some other people, Aaron Beck being one of the key people, became very similar to what we call cognitive behavioral theory. And it's what's called the cognitive revolution in terms of psychotherapy. And what the theories basically say that are, yes, events happen, right? Yes, we know events happen, and we know that there's not a whole lot that we can do. But what is in between the event and the emotion is what the theory calls your cognitive appraisal of the event. You give the event meaning and power and tell yourself what emotion to have, right? So event happens, you have an emotion, but in the middle there's this cognitive appraisal, and in the theory, they're called automatic thoughts, right? So you have these automatic thoughts, these mental tapes that are running in the background. They have been running the vast majority of your life, probably all of your life that you can remember. And those cognitive appraisals give the event meaning and power and thus tell you what to feel about the event. So if that's the case, what's the next step from there? And here, let me move my board a little bit. And then we have a behavior as a result of that, right? So the theory says events happen, we have a cognitive appraisal about the event, then we have an emotion and behavior. And the first thing that you're going to say to me is, Ryan, when somebody cuts me off in traffic, they don't even have to be across the line yet, and I'm already angry. Being cut off is anger. It means anger. And my challenge to you is that is not true. because 10% of the people in my office don't get mad when they get cut off in traffic. So what can we learn from that 10% of people? What is it that they're doing differently? Or is it just the fact that being cut off means anger? So the first piece to understand, I think, here is that yes, event to emotion is rapid fire for most people, especially the things that we get triggered by and the things that we get emotional about. So if that's the case, if event to emotion is rapid fire, why is that? I remember reading that apparently cockroaches have nerve endings in their backs that go straight to their legs. And those nerve endings, if they feel a swat coming, they'll start their legs chugging before it's actually processed the signal through the brain. You can see how that would be adaptive, right? That if a SWAT is coming, the cockroach runs before the SWAT can go, and they'll live and be able to procreate, unfortunately for us, right? But in the same way, though, if you put a cockroach in front of your pool and you blow on it, it will run into the water before it processes that there's a threat. So cockroaches, all the way to humans, have these very adaptive ways, and that seems to be our limbic response, our fight or flight response, right? So somebody starts to move over to cut us off in traffic, already we're angry. Boom, right into the anger response. But what our job is, and what a lot of therapy is about slowing that process down, understanding two things. First, events have no meaning in and of themselves. We have to understand that. There's lots of things. If someone were to lose a parent, that would, to one person, be an incredibly painful, strong event. But what if somebody doesn't know their parent? Then if they lost their parent or they found out that their parent had passed away, maybe they wouldn't have any emotion at all. Neither person is right or wrong, but we have to understand that all events are given meaning in the context of what they mean to the person. So no event has any meaning by itself. It's given meaning by the person who's experiencing it, by the person who's appraising it, and giving it meaning and power. The second thing we have to understand about therapy and about cognitive behavioral therapy is that what we're trying to do here is, number one, understand what your automatic thoughts are. What are those mental tapes that are running in the background? And then be able to, once we've identified them, modify them not to be more positive, because the power of positive thinking, it sounds great, but it doesn't seem to work. But we want to make those more balanced and rational, those thoughts that we're having, right? So how can we have more balanced and rational thoughts about the events? So I would ask my students when I was teaching at Arizona State, let's say somebody cuts you off and before you get angry, you're able to stop the tape, and then you can re-story that before you get into the anger emotion that you normally get into. And invariably someone would say to me, maybe he's on the way to the hospital because his wife is having a baby. And I would make the case that that is BS positivity. Because if that were the case, the population would be way higher than it is right now because everybody's on the way to the hospital having a baby. But what's a more balanced and rational way, not a BS positive way, to look at that? And so maybe, for me, for example, a more balanced and rational way is, maybe they didn't see me, I've accidentally done that to people before, it's not really that big a deal. And if I were to have that as a thought, then my emotion would probably be nothing. And my behavior, if anything, would be to back off of that person, because if they're not paying attention, I have places to go. They can get in an accident somewhere else. So simply by changing my cognitive appraisal, by number one, identifying what I'm telling myself and then changing it, I can actually change the emotion that I'm experiencing. And then it changes my behavior, which of course leads to new events and on and on and on. So the first thing to understand about this is events don't have meaning and power by themselves. They're given meaning and power by the person experiencing the events. And then whatever appraisal we give that, the meaning and power we give it, then leads to the emotion and behavior. So if we want to make a change, we have to be able to identify what we're telling ourselves and then change what we're telling ourselves into something more balanced and rational. Make sense so far? Next video, we'll talk a little bit deeper about where these automatic thoughts come from. Thanks for watching.